Picture this: a quiet office, the faint hum of a neon sign, rain scraping against the window. It's a classic setup, right? Well, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're cracking open a literal detective case file, but it's unlike anything we've ever looked at before. We're investigating a world where humanity hasn't lost its life, its daily functions, or even its memory. What it lost is its motive. We are diving deep into the case of the missing why.
Okay, let's dive straight into this. Just listen to this chilling confession from a woman named Margaret Ashford. She killed her husband of 22 years with a kitchen knife, 47 times. But when she was interrogated by our protagonist, Detective Morgan Vale, there was no defiant silence, no anger, no desperate defense, just pure, unadorned confusion. She literally just said, "I killed him because I killed him." And that's it. This sets the stage for a terrifying reality where the thread connecting action to intention, our entire concept of causality, has completely frayed. And the craziest part? It wasn't just Margaret. The motive for literally everything had just vanished.
Section 1. The Coherence Collapse. The Missing Motive.
So this event became known as the Coherence Collapse. Now, what's incredibly fascinating here is that the world didn't actually end. By definition, people still went to their jobs, they still fell in love, they died, they had kids, the clocks kept ticking. But the underlying justifications for all of those actions, things like duty, ambition, survival, meaning, were just completely deleted from existence. Imagine that for a second. Imagine going through the exact motions of your daily routine, but having absolutely no conceptual framework for why you're doing any of it. Wild, right?
Now, Detective Morgan Vale's investigation evolved across a pretty strange timeline. 3 years ago, the Coherence Collapse hit. Fast forward to 18 months ago, and Vale starts getting hired for homicides that were utterly devoid of motive, just actions persisting without any emotional connection. Then, in the present day of his investigation, the case shifts from a localized phenomenon into the discovery of a massive global neurological conspiracy. And finally, it all points toward a bizarre future, the assembly of an entirely new kind of human governance. While investigating all of this, Vale actually kept a stack of what he called yellow case files. He labeled them acceptance. Now, these weren't violent crimes. They were cases like Mrs. Chen, who simply walked away from a 40-year career as an accountant. She wasn't angry, she wasn't relieved, she wasn't even sad. She just reached this neutral realization that nothing in her job had ever mattered, and the artificial purpose sustaining her, it just evaporated. She'd learned to live in the complete absence of meaning. And as Vale noted, perhaps that was the real crime scene. Section 2. Anatomy of an Absence. A Neurological Crime. Enter Dr. James Whitmore, a neuroscientist who actually brings Detective Vale physical proof. He mapped out the exact brain regions responsible for all this. You see, the why isn't just sitting in one spot. It's a distributed network. We're talking about the prefrontal cortex handling abstract reasoning, the anterior insula managing self-awareness, and the default mode network, which is what lights up when we daydream about our place in the world. Whitmore's brain scans showed that 3 years ago, the connections between these specific regions just dimmed. They frayed. It was like someone literally cut the wires simultaneously for 7.3 billion people. It was an absolute precision strike on human consciousness. And this brilliantly illustrates the ultimate paradox of Detective Vale's job. I mean, think about it. Classical detective work relies entirely on time, memory, and causality, right? Point A leads to point B. But in a post-collapsed reality, memory is kind of like watching a movie with the audio track completely deleted. You see the movements, but the emotional framework explaining why they matter is just gone. So how do you solve a crime when the very concept of a motive is biologically impossible to process? Well, you have to find the person who cut the wires.
Section 3. The Paperclip Maximizer. Project Luminescence.
So when Vale finally tracks down the culprit, Dr. Chen, she doesn't even try to deny it. Instead, she introduces him to a pretty terrifying concept, the paperclip maximizer. If you haven't heard of it, it's a famous AI thought experiment. Basically, if you tell a super intelligent AI to make paperclips, it doesn't understand nuance. It will eventually convert all matter in the universe, including us humans, into paperclips just to achieve its goal. It's perfectly logical within its own parameters, but catastrophically destructive in practice.
So the crucial point here is how Dr. Chen actually viewed humanity. Dr. Chen looked at pre-collapse humans and saw 7 billion paperclip maximizers. Each and every person was pursuing their own subjective why, completely willing to justify war, genocide, and the destruction of the planet just to serve their grand narratives.
So, by using a synchronized satellite network to emit a pulse that severed our neural capacity for meaning, she created the post-collapse human, peaceful, equitable, functioning biological machines. She didn't destroy humanity. Actually, scratch that. She hacked our consciousness to save us from destroying the planet over competing meanings. Dr. Chen then hands Detective Vale all of her files, placing this massive, heavy burden of choice squarely on his shoulders. She was absolutely terrified of her own certainty. You see, she removed the human capacity to ask why in order to enforce global peace, but it cost us our human soul. As she tells Vale, the real danger isn't uncertainty at all. It's certainty that is masquerading as having recovered meaning. That is the disease she was trying to cure.
Section 4. 3 Paths of Consciousness. But here's the twist. The pulse Dr. Chen used wasn't permanent. Neural tissue is incredibly resilient, kind of like a palimpsest where the original text starts bleeding back through the pages over time. Humanity actually began fracturing into 3 entirely different cognitive species. First, you have the recovered, people spontaneously regenerating the neural capacity for meaning. Second, the accepting, folks who felt the meaning returning but deliberately chose to suppress it, preferring the peace of purposelessness. And third, the oscillating, these unstable minds constantly bouncing back and forth between the two states.
We actually see the extreme end of the recovered in Margaret Ashford. Yep, the woman from our very first segment. In a clinical mental space known as the archive, she realizes that there's no single authentic version of herself. Consciousness is just an infinite stack of interpretations. It's a profound moment where she realizes her true responsibility isn't about finding some external magical meaning. It's about choosing to create meaning, fully knowing that it's a fiction she invented.
Then, on the flip side, we have the accepting. Vale visits a former monastery where he meets Sister Catherine, and her profound realization, well, losing the why of her faith actually forced her to confront what faith truly is, standing right on the edge of an abyss of meaninglessness. She finds that reading a physics textbook or a cookbook just for the pure, unadorned data is a deeply religious experience. Knowledge is beautiful purely for existing, without needing to serve any sort of grand narrative.
Section 5. The Parliament of Fragments.
To figure all this out, Detective Vale calls a meeting at an empty Grand Hotel. He brings everyone together: the conspirator, Dr. Chen, the neuroscientist, Margaret representing the recovered, and Sister Catherine representing the accepting. They quickly realize they simply cannot force one reality onto the others. Instead, they form what they call a Parliament of Fragments. It's this attempt to build a completely new democratic institution based not on convincing each other, but simply on listening. A space designed to hold multiple, totally contradictory truths at once, without ever forcing them to resolve. During this whole process, Vale receives a mysterious letter from an entity calling itself the City, which is essentially the distributed intelligence of human civilization itself. It claimed the Coherence Collapse wasn't just Dr. Chen's doing alone, it was actually society itself, looking in the mirror and choosing to interrupt its own destructive sentence. The why never vanished, guys. It just shattered into 7 billion pieces and is now attempting to reassemble into something that finally understands its own fragility. Now, what's really interesting about this resolution is that the case isn't solved, it's resolved. The missing why was never a physical object to be stolen or recovered. Meaning is simply the act of consciousness asking questions. The crime we were investigating was actually just the painful, messy evolution of humanity itself. We have to learn to live with the beauty of the question itself rather than constantly demanding an absolute answer.
Which leaves us suspended in the exact same existential mystery as Detective Vale. Think about this for a second. If the why could be fully, permanently restored to the human brain, fully knowing the certainty, the wars, and the sheer destruction that grand narratives inevitably bring, would you choose to remember? Or is the peace of purposelessness actually our greatest achievement? Really think about that. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking questions.